Well, good morning and welcome to our webinar, to foliar or not to foliar? That is the question. Because everybody loves Shakespeare, right? We're going to attempt to answer farmers' questions today regarding foliar nutrition and micronutrients in general. So thanks a lot for joining us. I know time is precious and it's right in the heat of the season, but today is going to be fun. It's going to be a panel style of event that should wrap up in under an hour. It's going to be action packed. There's a lot to fit in. We got a couple of verbose individuals on the panel. I'm not going to name who's who, but I think we'll all know by the end. Today with me, I have a farmer, an agronomist, and a product industry guru to get to the bottom of some of these burning questions. But I have some questions for the panel. I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction to everybody that's on the panel. I'm going to give you the why of why we're here today. And then I'll get right into the questions that I have, but I also would love to see some questions from the folks on the call here, which you can easily either raise your hand or you can engage in the chat. So first up is the CEO of Aberhart Farms, and I'm so glad that he found the link and could join us this morning. Is the CEO of Aberhart Farms Suregrowth, and he's a partner in Aberhart Ag Solutions and Convergence Growth. Terry Aberhart, good morning. Good morning, Terry. How you doing there?
Good morning. How's everybody?
Everything is awesome. Terry, I'm gonna put you on the spot there here, just waking you up now that you got your link working. The little pop quiz that's gonna help frame our conversation today. So, and these are one-word answers, Terry. We're on a time budget here. How many acres did you put in this spring?
16,800-ish.
How many different crops did you put in?
4.
How long did that take you?
That's 20 days.
20 days. And how many people were involved in doing that?
A lot.
And what's your moisture and your frost situation there at Langeberg, just for all the farmers on the call?
We are really good moisture situation. We've got about 2.5 inches of rain in the last, storm that went through. We were getting dry on the surface before that, but we've got pretty good subsoil moisture. So crop intelligence stations are kind of pointing gung ho. And we had anywhere from, -1 to -2.2 across our stations the night before last. It only dipped below -1 for about an hour and was only below 0 for about 3 or 4 hours total. So there was a little bit of damage showing here and there last night when I looked, but most looked all right. So a couple more days will tell, but I think we're probably going to be okay.
Good. Well, I want some of the current conditions and current concerns of farmers like yourself to factor into the conversation with the experts today. But the final question is probably the most pertinent one: is how much money do you currently have invested in the ground?
I don't want to say. I don't know. I'd have to add it up a fair bit. Probably $150 an acre at this point, somewhere in there.
So that's really the question, isn't it? It's when the crop's popping out of the ground. I mean, I just think of the logistical, technical challenge, the feat of putting all this crop in the ground, and it's all coming up at the same time. Now what? So that's what we want to address today in terms of foliar nutrition. Now what? So next up, we have Tyler Lefley, a brilliant young and upcoming agronomist who's got a couple of ag degrees on the wall, with the most recent one being a master's in plant sciences. So he's pretty smart. I've watched his talent. It's very evident on the Earth, Dirt, Soil Network. His emails continue to blow me away. He's got 6 years international experience studying plant reproductive biology in Germany. That sounds like a good story over a few craft beers. And he currently resides in my hometown of Langeberg, Saskatchewan, where he's the agronomy lead for Suregrowth Solutions. He's passionate about being an agri coach and conducting field research. Of course, he's going to be helping us at Aberhart Ag over the years, just with new products, and he's doing some research on some stuff for us right now. And he wants to translate that, of course, into making his producers more profitable, right? He's boots on the ground. He's out in the field. He's living it, eating and breathing and sleeping it. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not going to ask you any pop quiz type questions to put you on the spot. Just
Well, I could have answered probably half of Terry's too.
I should have had a technical representative answering on behalf of Terry. Just get the accountant and the agronomist and the wife, and we'll get Dad in here, see if he's telling the truth. Okay. And then next up, a man who hardly needs any introduction, but Jarrett Chambers, leading expert in the interaction of nutrients and integration of biostimulants into plant physiology. That's a couple triple syllabic words there. He founded ATP Nutritions, one of the largest plant nutrient suppliers in Canada, wholly owned subsidiary of Concentric Ag. He's got a Master of Science in Soil Fertility and Microbiology from the University of Manitoba, where his research included determining the mode of action of Jumpstart. You might have heard of it. And Agrotane, you might have heard of it, technology. So today, Jarrett's the CMO for Concentric Ag, where he leads the sales and marketing efforts for the three families of products: biostimulants, nutrition, and analytics. And I think we have a few folks on the team here. So shout out to them. So we work with Jarrett and his products on the family farm. He's part of our advisory board for Aberhart Ag Solutions, and he's aiding us in our mission to bring recycled micronutrient technology to Canada. Highly recommend you check out his TEDx talk. I love that. Yeah, I'm not sure if Tyler didn't know that you were on YouTube.
I'm trying to get it off.
Trying to get it removed.
Yes.
But food for all, yield for the masses. And I hope some of that conversation seeps into today, really the nutrient density conversation. I think it will. So anyways, good morning, Jarrett.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to what you got to say. So it's going to be great. So I'm going to just quickly frame why we're here today, and then we'll get right into the questions. So our role as master distributor for Western Canada for GFL Ag is, of course, not only to distribute Biosol and Super KS and a lot of the cool products that are coming down the pipeline from that, but also find more technologies long term in this space that's a fit. Really, in the space is recycled, circular economy, fertility, which is just a really exciting place to be for us on behalf of the human race. And this conversation around Foliar Nutrition started at Aberhart Ag when Terry was over in a very different world in 2019 at Agritechnica, and he met an award-winning company by the name of TraceGrow. And he thought that what they were doing would fit perfectly into our big why with this whole sustainable agricultural space. And 8 or 9 years ago, the story is a bunch of farmers in Finland were farming around this recycling plant for batteries. And they said, there's gold in them, their hills. And they put together a plan. And a couple of years ago, they came to the market globally with new technology that recycles 250 alkaline batteries per 10-liter jug into a zinc, manganese, sulfate, foliar. And then they also included copper from used electronics. And so this is just incredible technology. I think, we were talking about this before. We believe the future is recycled. Human beings throw out half of what we consume. That's just not going to continue. And agriculture can provide the solution to a lot of these issues. We can wake up in the morning and be the answer to a lot of these global issues, whether it's nutrient density or pollution, and that's where we have to go. We have to get there. We all saw it this week on the sign in Outlook Elementary School in Saskatchewan, in our own backyard. We need to be the answer. This is not a small thing in our business. ESG, environmental sustainable government. So that you guys get it. I just wanted to mention that. And so that's why we're having this conversation. And that's why we're working in this space. But as we entered it, a lot of these questions come up: where to apply it, how to go about it. And there's a lot of great foliar solutions out there and a lot of great companies. So it's a lot about trust, I think. But what are the answers that we need here? So that's my introduction. I'm going to get into my first question. I'm just going to ask the question and then let the experts go at it. And I think this first round will go Jarrett, Tyler, Terry. And the first question is very simple. Why would a farmer consider using micronutrients, Jarrett?
Well, that's a pretty general question. Hey, thank you. That's a great question. Well, where do we start here? So I think one of the things that we start with is micronutrients, just like secondary nutrients and macronutrients, are all essential for plant growth. So we have to be sure that we have all those essential nutrients there. The way we look at this pecking order is, let's be sure we have our NPs and Ks and Ss sorted out. Then let's move into that next range, which is the micronutrients. Now, why should we look at micronutrients? Well, again, because they're essential, but the other piece that's really just thinking about it here, a really good example is the fact that our soils are challenged in micronutrients, in that the levels are at a point where we are getting deficiencies. In the case of zinc, and is a broad deficiency across the 3 prairie provinces. Boron is getting over to 50% of the fields are boron responsive. Manganese, there's pockets of manganese that are responsive, and copper, of course, there's copper deficiency. So we're actually seeing, as producers are producing a higher crop, bigger yields, they're pushing the crop, they're removing those elements, those micronutrients, and in a lot of cases, they're not being replaced by the same amount. So we're actually starting to lower our nutrient levels in our soil, the micronutrients. So as a result, they are stopping us from moving to that next yield threshold. So basically, why should they be looking at micronutrients? Because we have a lot of soils that are micronutrient deficient. If you allow me, Dan, I'll show one quick image on zinc.
I'd love to. Yeah, go ahead.
You have to.
I've got to give you.
If you can disable that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm going to make you the co-host here, champ.
So, if you can.
Is it working now?
Yeah, it is working now. And
Perfect.
so I think a great example is, I'll just use this as an example. If you can see this.
Yep.
So this is actually, a lot of people think about phosphorus. Red is bad, green is good. Anything red, yellow, or orange is probably going to be deficient in phosphorus. And you're gonna say, why are we talking about phosphorus? Well, what I wanna show here is that if we look at the 3 prairie provinces, you're looking at soils in most provinces, 2 out of every 3 soils being very low to low in phosphorus. And over 90% of the soils are responsive to phosphorus, medium to low to very low. A lot of us know that. We know that the soils are testing very low. But I think this next slide is going to really be a shocker, because that's phosphorus and that's zinc.
Wow.
Red is bad, green is good. Orange and yellow are still responsive. What's that map look like? Looks a lot like the phosphorus map. And if we actually start to look at this is actually fairly intimidating. 2 out of 3 fields in Manitoba are testing very low to low. 4 out of 5 fields in Saskatchewan are testing very low to low. 1 out of 3 fields in Alberta are testing low to very low. So this is not an isolated case. Zinc is the most deficient micronutrient on the planet, and it's no different here in Western Canada. And if we start tying that into some of the tissue work, this is some tissue results that came back from Western Canada as gets lumped together. And as we can see, not all of the producers and agronomists are addressing zinc. These are tissue samples. Once again, the story is simple. Red is bad, green is good. There's a lot of red. There's a lot of yellow. So there's a lot of yield drag happening because of, in this case here, just zinc. And Dan, I'm going to pass it back to you, but we have the same story for boron, for copper, and for manganese as well.
And just a quick follow-up question before we move on to, why Tyler considers his producers. Your TED Talk, how does this relate? Farmers might not be as aware, but the nutrient density thing is a big deal for the human race.
Yeah, so nutrient density is critical. Again, we have in the underdeveloped countries where they are focused on a cereal-based diet. We see that the most common micronutrient deficiencies that exist in human beings is zinc. It's a very common deficiency that happens, and there is ways to address it. We know that one of the best ways, of course, is to increase the nutrient density in these harvested grains. We know that for proper human nutrition, as well as agronomic nutrition, Dan, we need to have that cereal grain above 40 parts per million of zinc. Most of our zinc, our grain samples are testing anywhere from maybe 25 to 35 parts per million. Winter wheat is testing lower than that. In terms of, it will be testing anywhere from 15 to 20 parts per million zinc. So we are growing a very big crop as a world, on a world basis, but our nutrient density because of this can be compromised. So one of the best ways to address that is to actually fortify that grain while it's still being grown. And we've done some great work with the Harvest Zinc program, Dr. Ishmael Chakmak. We've worked a lot with it. In fact, Aberhart Farms has worked on it as well. And we've also shown that an application to fortify grain at that milk to soft dough stage is the critical timing to fortify that crop. Now, again, that's just not going to impact yield. That is actually impacting quality. Yield, of course, we need to start managing in the soil and throughout the season. So again, two different models, but they all come together. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I was just envisioning in some future society, soccer dads will have little Nutri-Scan things that check the density of zinc and tell you, yes, this crop was fortified with recycled zinc from alkaline batteries.
Absolutely.
Coming to a Sobeys near you. Seriously.
And so in that case there, you're going to be looking at, for the fortification, we've done a lot of work on rates, and we're seeing that we need just over 70 grams of zinc being applied at that milk stage to actually accomplish that. And so in the case of that, generally works out to about 2 liters an acre at that stage. It is not impacting yield. It is actually just addressing the nutrient density in the harvested grain.
Well, long term too, I hope farmers will be getting some sort of premium for nutrient density or be preferred provider for some of these, real world things that people want now in their food. So awesome. We covered a lot of ground there quickly, but I wanted to get to the general why. Tyler, you're working directly with producers that pay you for your advice to help them make money. So you're right in the line of fire. Why would you tell your farmers to consider using micronutrients, when and where and why?
So more on the coaching side of things, definitely. Well, I love doing feedlot agronomy just because I know that usually the NPK and S is already like taken care of and really optimized. So in those situations, we definitely have to start looking at micronutrients more intensively. But on regular grain farming operations, though, it's more of a, I guess on the micronutrient side, if you want to be able to push your goals in terms of production, it's just one of those things that you have to top up and realize that there are interactions in your soil, and having to deal with availability. Essentially, you're stuck. Whatever you got in the ground, it's not going to change. And pH is one of those things that we really have to significantly look at and take into consideration with our micronutrients, because at the time, not everybody is going to be able to afford these massive, costly granular applications that will, set you up for 15, 20 years. And so then we have to look at spoon feeding, and the producers that really want to push things, we really have to nail down the timing and understand our critical levels on our soil tests, tissue testing, and know which crops are going to be the most responsive to certain micros, and know where it pays as well on the farm. So that's more on the coaching side. And yeah, it's going to be tough to break yield barriers if you don't address and take a 360-degree view in terms of crop nutrition.
Well said. You were mentioning to me, in an ideal world from an agronomist perspective, which is sort of sometimes hard to execute on the real logistical world and financially, if you could, you'd have producers put down, $50 supply an acre of micronutrients and get everything topped up now, but rather than the spoon feeding that you mentioned.
Yeah, but at the same time, I do think, it's tough to get people, well, it's just the financial health of the operation too at the same time, right? Because that stuff ain't cheap. And knowing fertilizer prices just for our macros right now are quite through the roof, in my opinion.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't take much to go and pick up a $7,500 bag of, these heavy metal sulfates, and just simply broadcast it or put it through your saddle tank on your drill and lift up your mid rows and just put a little small plot and kind of make little patches throughout the farm and see what's responsive and what's not, because that'll tell you at the same time, and it'll be something that you'll see every year for the next 15 years. Still, you'll have those plots, and that'll tell you, okay, maybe I should be looking at a spoon feeding program, because if these large applications are not feasible, which we look at in terms of financial health, definitely not something that's going to be catch fire. But at the same time, it just makes sense. Okay, you got your reference check that tells you what you got, and you'll see it year after year.
Awesome. No, and we'll delve into a little bit about how to tell and where to put it and all that stuff. So Terry, same question. Why would a farmer, well, you're a farmer, why are you using some micronutrients? Why are you doing it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to mention that I love the sexy maps that Jarrett has. They're almost as sexy as his shirt, but anyways, really cool story to tell there through those maps. And I think really at the bottom line, I'm not nearly as smart as these other two, so I'll keep it a little more simple. But the reason we would consider micronutrients or use them is really just to look for increased ROI, right? Like at different levels of your operation or performance on your farm, I kind of like to use analogies back to sports or human performance, right? Like once you kind of get your macros figured out and that's performing well, then you look for what other areas can you gain yield with better ROI. It's not just about spending more money just to grow a couple more bushels of grain so you can brag at the coffee shop. It's really, we're farming as a business to create profit. And if using micronutrients in the right way creates more profit, then it's a great thing to do. And so I think, we kind of look at it at kind of what level, like Tyler and Jarrett alluded to, maybe at the start, there's certain things that you focus in on. If I'm going to go run the 5K marathon, Manitoba Marathon, and, maybe I go eat a bowl of pasta the night before, because I think that's kind of what you should do. But if Jared's going to run the 26 mile, which I think he's done, he might have a little bit of a higher level nutrition program and some other things, supplements to go along with it to reach that level of performance, right? So that's really what we're looking at with the crops is, trying to fine tune whether it's yield, quality, standability, ability to mitigate stress. Like that's one thing, zinc's a big thing when we're talking about cold season, early starts, frost, all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of the overview of what we look at it at the farm. And I think farmers generally look at things as, hey, if it's going to make me more money, I'd like to look at it.
Well, you know what they say, Terry, pasta makes you faster.
Did they
I gotta eat a lot of it.
Break out the itchy band on the race to the cedar in the morning.
Yeah.
Next, I think a little bit of debate here, gentlemen, on where fertility should be placed. Is it better in the soil right next to the seed? Is it, broadcast on top? Should you be putting on the leaf? Are you putting down large amounts? Are you spoon feeding it? And ancillary to that, from the internet, from Shane Thomas, who is on the call. How important is it to understand the nutrient form when making a product decision? Secondarily, how important is it to understand nutrient load per acre? Nutrient load per acre. Interesting. How much weight should be put on having a biostimulant in combination with foliar nutrient? But where should this fertility go, Jarrett, in your opinion, and what combination and why?
Okay, well, that's a great question. So every element is slightly different. But if we're talking about trace elements for micronutrients in this fashion, I think there's a little bit of a paradigm shift, and I think the approach needs to be little and often. That has a really good management plan associated with the support Tyler's saying, rather than if you can find $35 or $40 an acre for an element to start to build up your soil, that's one objective. That's not really a scalable objective, but I think little and often is a great approach. And I think we see that in the trace elements. I think a great example, I can just give a really simple example here as well, is my apology here. I was just a really great example is actually some work that's been done by a number of people, but I think I can maybe capture it here best in a boron study that was done. That, of course, you just have to find the deck there. And I think, can you see that there, Dan?
Yep. Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting here, when we think about boron, of course, not by a show of hands because we're on a virtual call here, but how many people think that we should be put on boron the first time at 10% flowering because that's the time that we need it? The answer is yes. But if you wait until 10% flowering and your soil, of which 50% of the soils in Western Canada are boron responsive, how much yield do you think you've lost for those first 56 days of the season? Every day that plant is boron deficient. Now, so what this piece of data is showing, this was a stacking trial that basically showed if we go the second bar from the right where it says fungicide only, it says fung only, and versus the check on the far left, you'll see that an application at 10% bloom gave a 1 bushel response. And a lot of people say, yeah, I'm not sure if I got a boron response. Well, actually, that field was boron deficient. There was tissue deficiencies, tissue samples showing boron deficiency. If we put a little bit on in the soil, we got a similar response as that late season application. But as we start looking through that middle section of this chart, we see that an application of soil application plus a herbicide application, or soil plus a fungicide, or soil plus all three, which is H plus F plus soil, that is actually where we're getting some of our best responses. So little and often feeding that plant. Why is this relevant here? A lot of reasons why is because trace elements such as zinc, such as manganese, such as copper, and on, and even sulfur for that matter, are not very mobile in the plant. So because they're not mobile in the plant, as new plant material is being produced, they either are not moving to the new plant material quick enough to keep up with the plant demand, or in the case of boron or calcium, and to a lesser extent manganese, they actually, once they get locked into that cellular structure of the plant, they can't remobilize. So every piece of new tissue that's formed needs to have potentially supplemental applications. So you have to feed it little and often throughout the season. And
You
that
need
doesn't,
an agrifac, is what you're saying.
Yep,
You've got to
yep.
get 175 metric boom and spray all the time.
And so this becomes critical. So every time you're going across the field, the question should be, what am I thinking about? What does my soil sample look like? What does my tissue sample look like? What did I put on the field? What should I be touching up? Plus, we also have to tie into the fact of lack of nutrient mobility and also nutrient demand on the crop at different stages, which we won't get into. But this is just an example of boron. We have similar examples, of course, for manganese, similar examples, of course, for copper and zinc as well. But
Well, we'll get to the timing. You know, we'll get to a little bit more of that. But that's really good. Sets a stage in terms of how we're looking at things. What would you add to that, Tyler?
It's 100% agree there with Jarrett on the mobility side of things, because yeah, the timing is so important. And if you don't have the big enough gas tank of micronutrient in the ground, then you're gonna the tank's gonna run dry if the plant, let's say it's, you know, just at the end of a vegetation stage, then you're screwed for reproductive, and then the tank runs dry. So that's why you see those big yield bumps when you see micronutrient application later on, just before reproductive, especially with boron and canola. Boron sucks at mobilization, and consequently, we also have a lot of soils that are high in calcium out our region. Not so much. I know there's a lot of people out there with acid soils, but yeah, just with boron availability, that limits it too. So when you're looking at soil tests, it's like, okay, you might have a decent amount of parts per million, let's say boron, copper, or zinc, but at the same time, the availability with, you know, when you consider pH, calcium, and other inherent interacting factors, then you're kind of screwed. So it's also, okay, what does the plant see, and what can you do to limit the tank from running dry? So yeah, I completely agree with, you know, you got to look at spoon feeding down the line eventually. Nobody's got 100% perfect ground out there with, you know, amazing micronutrient levels across the board. So it's just
I thought Terry did.
Getting there.
Right on. So I'm thinking of the analogy of like a pit stop for a race car. You need to get a new set of tires to get you to the end of the race to finish first. Terry, when you eat your Smarties, do you eat the red ones last? I don't know why I thought of that. I just thought I'd put you on the spot there. But where do you put your nutrients? What's that, Tyler?
Don't like red Smarties.
I don't like
Well,
red
first of all, I just would probably back up a bit and, just where would you spend your dollars and those kind of things. So, really at the start, you need a soil test. You need a soil test first to see what's in your soil and if something's low, just like the maps that Jarrett showed. Secondly, you need a tissue test because you can see that the tissue maps were very similar to the soil maps, but they're not exactly the same. So just because it's maybe low on the soil test doesn't mean it's low on your plant. So if it's low on your soil test and it is low on your tissue test, it's probably something that maybe you should start looking at. Then you probably either need to do a lot of research and be really smart or work with someone like Tyler or Jarrett and other people in the industry that understand that, because there's a lot of nuances around each micronutrient is different as far as mobility in the plant, mobility in the soil, timing, things like this. But one of the things that I really like that Tyler's been working with our clients and with our farm too is say, like, instead of playing around with all these different products and trying to figure out if there's a response, let's just go take some small plots and whack on a crazy amount of boron or zinc or whatever and see if there's a response. And if there is a response, then we know, okay, the crop could use more of that nutrient. Let's figure out in our system, in our soils, and how much we need and what's the best placement. Is it foliar? Is it granular? Or whatever it may be. But first you want to determine, do you need that? And will there be a response? And if so, then how do we go about doing that in the most efficient and the highest return for the operation? And that's not incredibly complicated, but typically it's really good to work with an agronomist or someone that knows these things, because I think a lot of times where people fail is they're not using it in the right way or the right place or maybe the right time, and then they get frustrated and throw their hands up and walk away.
Makes sense. Well, you answered my next question, which is great because I'll kind of circle back. But where then, having this knowledge, where then do you put the nutrients? I mean, how do you lay out? Where do your micros go on the farm?
Yeah, so I guess I think you're asking me, but
yeah, I'll just ask Terry to continue on that thought, and then I'll circle back, Tyler and Jarrett, how you guys would sort of diagnose and figure out what's needed and where.
So I'll maybe just share a bit of kind of my own path with our farm and initially starting the agronomy business. When we first kind of got into this, foliar was the way we did a lot of stuff, just because it was simple, it was easy. Throw a jug in the tank and put some strips in the field and do some tissue tests, see if you can see a response. And so, that's kind of how I see a lot of guys start. That's not necessarily always the right way, depending on the situation. Like I said, I do really like the idea that Tyler's been working with now some of our clients, and just getting some granular boron or zinc or whatever and whacking on some heavy strips, and then we're going to monitor it and see what happens. But typically you see lots of guys start with foliars because it's easy to do, it's easy to measure, it's not a super high investment off the start. But what I've seen as well, just watching guys in the AgriTrend network and some of the top coaches and farmers over the years, is a lot of times they end up realizing there is kind of a response or a benefit to certain micros, and then they'll start gravitating towards, are you putting a Band-Aid on the problem with just a foliar, right? Or do you want to try to, is it economical to fix the soil, right? And so then guys may look at, going to a granular with a supplement of in-season foliar to, as Jarrett showed on his chart, right? Like sometimes you can't just put a whack of stuff in the soil and it's going to fix the problem all season long. So generally what we see as guys evolve is they may start with foliar and then they'll gravitate to a soil build and foliar top up and just kind of go from there. So that's that's kind of what I've experienced in my 15 or 16 year time working with this stuff and with farmers and other agronomists. So
Yeah, and I'm sure it's an evolution for everyone. Tyler, if somebody brings you their soil tests and or tissue tests, how do you go about determining what should be done next?
Well, I guess I can even add on to a bit of Terry's thing. So, like, my utopia in terms of bringing that to on-farm management would be breaking it down to field-specific management, honestly. And I think going forward, especially when you get to these larger operations, you're going to have blocks of land located in different geographical areas, and of course, you're going to have different soil types, and that we see a lot of farmers out there just blanket application, and they don't measure it, but at the same time they'll see a response somewhere, but it's not across the whole farm, so that they're going to axe that product from their lineup. So in order to maximize ROI, when you look at it, you got to get to, I think the future is getting down to field specific management, but even more on that side, being able to whack on these crazy rates of micronutrient, it almost acts like a kind of a barcode check. If you have different geographical blocks of land spread out, then have somewhere in those blocks have a Trek strip with these heavy rates of micros, and then kind of be able to assess year to year. Because when I'm, in my Chevy Colorado driving back from Saskatoon with 1,700 pounds of boron, of boric acid in my truck, and dropping off the clients on my way there, and just say, hey, because at the same time, my gratification there is I'm essentially doing a trial that these guys are going to see for the next 15, 20 years. And they're going to figure out in terms of coaching long term, oh, wow, this is a product that I should probably look at if my fertility has improved to a point that I'm seeing a response on boron now. So same thing goes for zinc and copper. And yeah, so it's a matter of having the confidence to pull the trigger. And in terms of coaching, it's how do you give the client or the farmer the confidence to do it? And it's $70 bag of product to just put them on their front step, it seems, and that does the job.
Great points about coaching. I love that. And I love that you're actually doing it. Jared, how do you go about determining what goes where? How do you know?
Well, I think just to reiterate what Terry said and then build off it, you start with a soil sample. Again, you got to know if you got to invest in it. And then how do you invest in it? So I'm going to throw a couple little, not caveats here, but throw a couple little other teasers around to think about as a general rule. I'm going to talk about manganese for a second here. Maybe not a lot of manganese in Western Canada, but a fascinating element. The data is incredibly strong that shows the best way to manage manganese is as a foliar. That's been very, very well documented. And the reason why is manganese is an interesting element in that it actually changes valency. It changes charge in the soil. You will put on an available form of manganese and it will quickly convert to an unavailable form of manganese. So the return on your investment from a soil application of manganese is poor. So manganese is an element that you need it throughout the whole season, just like every element, but we need to be spoon feeding it through the season as a foliar application. And again, whether it's from Ontario or whether it's from the United States or whether it's from overseas, manganese application as a foliar has been well documented to be very strong and really one of the only ways to go. So that was something that we haven't talked about. The other thing in regards to timing, in regards to using soil as a tool, which I completely support, as Terry said, it can get very expensive to put everything on in the soil. And so it is, start with a little bit in the soil. If you want to build your soils up, that will take a few years to do and quite a bit of money. We've seen that with boron. We have to put on 3 years of 2 pounds of boron in the soil to actually start addressing some of our tissue samples getting into the proper level. So on that process, like Terry said, start in the soil and spoon feed it along the way. A great example, another one that we talked about is copper. We haven't talked about copper, but copper is a fascinating one, a real Canadian nutrient. That really the Canadians are some of the pioneers in regards to copper nutrition. And there's been some fantastic work showing that the best timing for copper applications, of course, besides the soil, but in season applications is growth stage 31 and growth stage 45. So what does that actually mean to people? Well, what that actually means is growth stage 31 is the start of stem elongation. And that's that first application of copper where it really shows a lot of value. And then, of course, you come back at growth stage 45, which is actually the boot stage, which is, again, where you're putting on a fungicide. And that stacking effect, whether it's been generated from Mali, has done a lot of that work. In fact, even Regis Karamannis, a person who sometimes is supportive of this, sometimes is not, is actually his research data, his PhD work shows this timing is very good, along with people like Ian Evans and Elson Solberg and other people from Alberta have done fantastic work. And again, we can continue to repeat that. And even Dr. Chakmak and Dr. Marshner have shown that timing works very well. So again, those are the critical timings for that element. And again, do you need to use them? Well, you need to do your soil test. You need to do your tissue test to address that. In the case of zinc, because zinc is so tied to phosphorus, I like to manage zinc the way I manage phosphorus. So when you're putting high yield rates of phosphorus in the soil, I want to be sure that you're putting on zinc to complement that. When you're going on with that early season phosphorus to kick it in the butt, I want to be sure that zinc's there with that herbicide application because they're tied in very nicely together. And again, just for fun, just because I put some of these together, I just wanted to hopefully, I'm not sure what you guys are seeing here in terms of a slide. Are you seeing anything?
We just saw your slide deck briefly.
So you can, which one are you
There,
seeing?
we're on boron
Boron.
timing trial.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, my apologies. So I want to just show you a very interesting piece of information here. And I think this is a critical one here. So this is a fascinating one. When you start pushing your rates of phosphorus fertilizer, you actually start triggering a zinc deficiency. None of these three pots have had any zinc fertilizer applied to them. You put on a low, medium, and high rate of phosphorus, and a high rate of phosphorus starts to trigger a zinc deficiency. That's quite fascinating. The reason why is because 45 to 50% of our zinc is taken up by the mycorrhizal population in the soil. This is the mycorrhizae is a symbiotic relationship with the plant and the root system. And with high rates of phosphorus, the plant doesn't feed that mycorrhizae as well. So as a result, the mycorrhizae population is reduced. So as a result, zinc uptake can be compromised. Now, this also becomes critical in the case of canola, because canola is a non-mycorrhizal plant. It doesn't have mycorrhizae with it. So again, you start putting on high rates of phosphorus in canola, you start triggering a zinc deficiency. And I think this just overlays it, maybe shows the synergy on why we need to think about nutrients in multiple fashions, not just one at a time. We got to get rid of, Liebig's law of the minimum. Here we show the low, medium, and high with no zinc. We trigger zinc deficiencies. We increase our phosphorus on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you put on zinc, and now you get the power of your phosphorus. So that's what we're trying to show on the right-hand side. You increase your phosphorus with adequate zinc and away you go. So in the case of zinc, I like to see it started early, hit it early in the season, get into the soil, manage your phosphorus with it. So every element I look at differently.
Wow. So it's sort of stacking of knowledge translating into action where know your soil test, know your tissue test, know your crops, know your nutrients, know your timing. It's very easy. Tyler, did you want to build on that at all, or just say like it depends?
Yeah. Well, I guess. But even then, at the same time, when I'm looking at soil tests in the winter, it's when you see phosphorus levels that are off the charts, then immediately you already have that pre-planned in your crop plan. Essentially, like it's kind of a given at that point. And luckily, even there's certain types of there's certain livestock manure that it has higher concentration of zinc in it, so it kind of plays off a bit, which is nice. And then you just have to focus on copper and boron. But yeah, when I see fields that have sky high phosphorus levels, or even guys that are saying, hey, we're gonna go nuts when the phosphorus is cheap and put down like 70-80 pounds. I've even heard of the odd one around 100, and it's like, yeah, we better program something in. So yeah, it all makes sense to me.
So let's put the rubber to the road and bring this all together then with our panel of experts. And you know your soil test, you know your tissue test, you know the timing, and you know the crops and the nutrients and all that. You've got all that. But now you got to go physically put this into the sprayer tank, and it might be turn into goo, or you might not be the exact right timing. And then, well, now you got to decide if you're going to make an extra pass. What's the economics of that? How do we physically execute this? What's the tank mixing, timing, handling, do's and don'ts? Is there justification for a separate pass? You're talking about PGRs, maybe justifying a separate pass, Tyler. How do we put this hizzle jizzle juice in the tank and get some return here?
Yeah, get the voodoo stuff in the tank. At the same time, well, even Terry and I were chatting this past week about, even combining stuff with manipulator timing. But I guess just going over the data, and then Terry's also talked to the rep and going back and forth between data in North America and Europe. So I think, yeah, long term, definitely probably better with applying the manipulator with the herbicide timing, as they've kind of seen the same results. So, but at the same time, if there's guys out there that have to do that early herbicide pass that's not suitable for manipulator, then I think it is an option that if it's still a fixed cost in their crop plan programming, as they're going for the high yields, and manipulator and these PGRs, they do pay in both yield bumps and even combining efficiency. It's just come down to the compatibility. And of course, it's kind of unique that, Jarrett mentions that the growth stages for maximum return on investment for these micros, well, it overlays perfectly with manipulator timing, where Modus at that growth stage 31. So it's just something to keep in mind. I know we'll be testing on Terry's farm, doing a trial or two this year, especially with Modus recently coming out. But in terms of tank mix compatibility, I'll probably hand it off to either Jarrett or Terry, because they've had the more experience mixing the voodoo juice than I have. And Jarrett's probably the one planning the compatibility, because I know pH has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, Jarrett, where do we put this stuff in the tank? How do we get it on? Do separate passes? What do we do?
So general rule of thumb, you got to test your local water. But again, the way we always look at this is water goes in the tank first. You put all your soluble products in second. Be sure they dissolve, move them through. You put in your emulsifiable concentrates. You put in emulsifiable concentrates and all your crop protection products. You put in your surfactants. And then the last thing into the tank is the nutrient. So in this case here, the key thing is in your chem handler. It's generally not recommended to tape all of those things, your adjuvants, your surfactants, your crop protection products, and your nutrients. If you put them all into the chem handler at the same time, you could get yourself into quite a bit of trouble. Even if they are compatible, it is about one step, then the next step. Chem handler, dissolve it, move it into the sprayer. Next one, dissolve it, move it in, be sure it's in solution, on and on. And it's got a lot to do with any type of crazy pH adjustments that may be happening in the tank. So bottom line, again, we've done, we have many compatibilities done. There's some do's and don'ts in terms of mixtures. We'd have to go to the charts for specific questions, but you kind of do this one at a time, and the nutrient goes in last. You don't need to do a separate pass. You just need to just think about it logically, step by step, in terms of that, and just don't rush the process in regards to it.
Great. Terry, did you have anything to add to that, or shall we
Yeah,
move
for
on?
sure. I think it just, again, really important as you start to dabble into these things to work with some people that have the knowledge and do your homework and research. We may or may not have experienced, some wonderful crop burn that keeps you awake at night with certain mixes and temperatures and things like that. So when you are adding nutrients at times, sometimes it can heat up the mix. Sometimes it can cause some other issues. And, we may or may have not have had, a tank gel up because we didn't check the mix first, or got a little complacent around.
I think Harvey may have complained to me about that at one point.
Yeah, maybe. But we won't save the details of that for this call. just for liability issues. But yeah, no, and I think what's really important, like what we've done over the years, is kind of two things. You want to work with coaches and experts, whether it's guys like Elston or Jarrett or Tyler or whoever it may be that understand these things. And then if you work with the right companies, I think that's really important. There's a million companies out there selling a million different kinds of stuff that are all essentially the same in one form or another, but they all say they're different, right? But what we've done on the farm and even with our business as well is strategically align ourselves with companies that first focus on the science, because at the end of the day, that's where it should start. And then ones just that want to work with you, want to be a great partner in your operation, ones that you trust, because there's a lot of people out there honestly just selling stuff. I mean, we're all selling stuff in some form, I guess, but just because something worked on rice in Zimbabwe may not mean it's going to work locally in Saskatchewan on a wheat crop, right? So we like to work with companies that understand Western Canada and our crops and our situations, and also like ATP has been great to work with. If there's different mixes we want to try, and here's the chemicals, they'll do jar tests for us and things like that. And so whatever it may be, just work with the right coaches and work with the right partners that are going to the right partners, whether it's a chem company or a micronutrient company or anything, is more interested in helping you be successful. Because if you're successful, you're going to continue to use their products rather than just sell you something and walk down the road to the next farmer, right? So
Yeah, that's sad when things go that way, and it kind of gives everything a bad name. Because I think there is a kind of a snake juice stigma around that. But you do a great job of answering my questions before I ask them, because that's kind of my last question. What do you look for in a product and a supplier? Like you say, there's many out there. You alluded to the trust factor, and obviously there's the knowledge factor. And from at Iron Healer on the internet, on Twitter, we all know who that is. He said very, very what do you say, with tons of class here, are you actually getting what's claimed in the product, or is it just angel piss? So Tyler, I'll let you tackle this one, or Terry, if you got some comments, and we'll go around the horn to you, Tyler, and then let Jarrett wrap it up. And then if the audience has any questions, we'll take this home. But that's where on the
just the last addition to that. Yeah, I mean, there is lots of stigma around some of these things, and some of them are, angel, what, or whatever. But there also is products that work really well in certain situations. So it's just kind of understanding that. And again, I think it's, working with companies that you can trust, or you feel you can trust, and back what they do with science and research and data and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we look for. And we've worked with there's some really great companies and reps and stuff in Western Canada here to work with. So
well, for you, Tyler, you're on the Earth, Dirt, Soil Network, and I'm always really interested in a lot of the product conversations that go around with agronomists. A lot of agronomists are like, hey, my producer wants to use this, the salesman saying that. How do you quantify it? So maybe, peer to peer is one way you figured out, but how do you determine what's a good product or supplier for your customer? And how do you know what's getting into the product, or is it just angel piss?
Well, my approach to it is honestly, like, you're spending so much money, and at the same time, it drives me nuts that nobody is order some 50 milliliter centrifuge tubes, take a sample of it, and keep it around. And when I'm doing trials with clients that are testing new products, or new companies or new suppliers as well, it's, do the trials, but at least keep a sample around at all times with the centrifuge tube. It's like a $2 initiative. And if you don't see a response in your trials that you're conducting, properly, with a good agronomist, then at the same time, it's a $30, $35 test to send that tube into A&L for a mass spectrometry, which is state of the art. It identifies everything. I don't see why it's a tough thing to do to save $50 aside for testing your your purchase when you're spending, thousands of dollars. It's,
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's just,
so you can have it analyzed for $35 and you'll see exactly what's in there.
yeah, ICP analysis through now.
Well, that's a great thing to know. I should have suspected, but good information. I wonder how many producers do that. How many producers are testing some of their products now and then?
Nobody. I guarantee.
Yeah. Well, Jared, you've been around the horn on this whole industry. You can relate what helps be successful picking a product and supplier, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think there's a, we kind of got two things going here, and so we want to kind of break it out into a couple pieces. If we stick to, we'll address the micronutrient thing for a second, right? So here's the bottom line: micronutrients are essential. They're essential nutrients to grow a crop. It's the first page of every plant nutrition book in the world. They're essential. They are required. If you don't have them, you will lose yield. If your soil test is low, you have lost yield. So as we've been talking about, when should we put them on? So you cannot replace a micronutrient with something that is not a micronutrient. You cannot replace an element with something else. So the question becomes, what form of that nutrient should we put on? As general rules, these are general rules. If you are going into the soil, you have to have an element that is protected, that stays in soil solution for a longest period of time. Ideally, if it's a liquid, it should be a chelated product, so it stays in solution for a long period of time. If it is a granular, it should be some type of complex sulfate, so it stays in solution for as longest period of time. Oxides are slow release, they're unpredictable, they vary by 4 different factors. So you tell me what those factors are, and you tell me if you can predict the rate of release of your oxide. And if you can, then you'd be the first person in the world that can. So that is just basically a waste of money. So number 2, if you want my real opinion, I'll give it to you. Number 2, foliar application is completely different, because what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a hostile soil environment with thousands of different organisms? Or are we dealing with soft tissue that we require a small amount of nutrition to feed that plant for 7 to 10 days? It's the latter. So now we need an element in a form that is readily available, that enters the plant quickly, that the plant can break apart with the least amount of energy and convert those elements into the whole metabolism of the plant to drive photosynthesis. So in this case here, it's about simple chemistry. It's EDTA. First of all, oxides don't work. Let's not even go there. Oxides don't work. They're actually a fungicide. So that's gone. We put oxides onto our Band-Aids if we want to actually keep the bacteria off our leaf. That's where we use oxides. Or you can put it on a big nose like myself so you don't get sunburned. That's where they're useful for. Okay. So once again, I'll tell you the truth in a longer story. So you take something like an EDTA, which is amazing in the soil. As a foliar, it's good, but it's not great. Why is it good? It's soluble, enters the plant quick. And in the case of zinc, you're going to get the zinc taken up. EDTA has no value to the plant. The plant has to tear it apart, takes that energy, and it has to store it somewhere, and it has no contributing factor. Now you take something like a zinc sulfate or a zinc nitrate or something like that. Zinc sulfate, great product, small, soluble, gets to the plant quickly, and now we can use to break that zinc into zinc and sulfate. Sulfur is quite easy by the plant. Now what do we get? We got zinc nutrition and sulfur nutrition, both in forms that the plant likes. Very efficient way to do it. So that is, the form is critical. So small, soluble products. And again, we have to manage it with water, and we have to manage the uptake as a foliar. Soil's a different strategy. Second portion of your question is, how do we get to all the different names and all the different miracle products that go there to solve things? Well, one of the simplest things that we kind of do is we do it 2 different ways. The first question we always ask ourselves, or if people come to us and try to convince us, is what's in your product and how does it work? And if they can't tell you those 2 questions, then you just ask them to leave until they can come back. So that's pretty basic. What's in our product and how does it work? Here's the next question. Is your product CFIA registered? It's not that hard of a question. Is your product CFIA registered as a supplement?
And that's coming there.
That's a pretty simple answer. If the guy goes, I'm going to do, yes, no. One is 2 letters, one is 3 letters. Less is more. Okay. So you think about what we work with as our company. They're CFI registered.
Yeah.
Does that mean they work? No. But what that means is they're CFI registered. Now, how do they work? What's the active ingredient in it? How does it work? And this is where you have to work with their proper agronomist to say, what does that long-winded multi-syllable name really mean to me? And you have to get to the mode of action. You have to figure out the mode of action. And if you actually figure out the mode of action, then what you realize with these categories, which are called biostimulants, by the way, these are biostimulants. There's 4 different families of biostimulants. There's the carbon-based biostimulants, the plant extracts, there's the protein hydrolysates, and actually the microbial extracts. Those are the 4 main families that exist. And you need to figure out exactly how they work. Ultimately, what is the purpose of a biostimulant? It's to increase nutrient uptake, nutrient use efficiency, deal with abiotic stress, which is environmental impact, deal with environmental impact to ultimately drive plant health and yield. Here's the cool thing. Increase nutrient uptake, increase nutrient use efficiency. Doesn't say replace nutrient uptake, doesn't say replace nutrient applications, doesn't say to lower nutrient rate. What it says is increases uptake and nutrient use efficiency. It is complementary to proper plant nutrition. Sometimes I think about a biostimulant, maybe metaphorically, the way you think about a herbicide and the surfactant that's in the herbicide. Herbicides kill a plant. How do they kill it well? How do they kill it efficiently? With the proper surfactant, additive, adjuvant in it to really get into the plant to kill it. That metaphorically is what a biostimulant is. Biostimulant gets that plant really cranking up, but we got to be sure the nutrition is there. So I'm not exactly sure what your question was, but I thought I'd go on to a rant there for a while.
No, that's a great way to wrap it up. That's a great way to wrap it up. And yeah, I thought we'd have a lot more questions from the audience, to be honest, because I know I mean, this is complicated stuff, granted, you know, and hopefully we've, you know, provided some fodder for thought, illuminated a little bit of a potential roadmap, you know, given you maybe some excitement about trying some out. I mean, I wonder what percentage of producers this year, I mean, that's a great Twitter poll, like what percentage of you know, producers out there are planning to use some foliar nutrition this year? Or they're just, well, we tried that a couple of years ago, we never saw any results, so we're not going to bother. And that's fair. And I think lots of producers are down that path. But I think over time, let's face it, as we get better at things, we can evolve to more finer points. Like, if I'm doing all the good things in my life in terms of my own personal health, I might be ready for some supplements. But if I'm drinking a case of beer and eating KFC and living a rather sedentary life, there's no point in going to Popeyes. Robert, from Robert's sake, thanks for joining us today. As we increase target yields, we need to go through steps of increased fertility. Comments around this? Who would like to jump on that one?
Yeah, I commented back to Rob there. I mean, I just think, like anything else, we've talked about it all the way through the call here, but as things evolve, you need to continually look at tweaking those programs. And yeah, maybe you had poor phosphorus fertility and you tried zinc and it didn't work. Now you've got great phosphorus fertility. Zinc may be your next factor that matters, right? So and we're finding that as we evolve through our farm, there's certain practices that we used to do that gave us a great response, but now that we've got to a different level of soil fertility, right, they're not giving us a response anymore, but there's something else that didn't work before that we need to consider. So it's a constant evolution. If you want to continue to increase your performance, you need to look at what's the next thing, or what do you need to do differently? So the famous saying goes, if you want to, you know, get what you always got, do what you always did, kind of thing, right? So if you want to continually evolve and improve, it's a continual process that never ends. That's what makes farming so much fun.
Well, you know, I think a big part of the conversation is to look at the canola demand for crushing is going to be crazy pressure on the entire farming complex in Western Canada. I don't even think we know the full impact of what's coming, and it's going to change the face of farming here. And we're going to it's going to be a pig scramble for yield and output and getting to the finish line, folks, I think. And it's super positive. And I love the concept of drilling down and getting field specific. So again, my offer stands. I don't know if anybody got to the end of my crazy video that I produced for this webinar, but my offer was, if you could get through 2 minutes of my rant, my offer stands to anybody on the call. if you would like to have a consultation with Tyler at Suregrowth to talk about exactly, like, to expand upon your situation and relevance to what we discussed here today, we'd be happy to facilitate that as Aberhart Ag, because we're looking to learn, and I think that's really the path for us. We've got the recycled component of the products. In 10 years, I want to have a conversation where we're saying, well, all sources of zinc and manganese and copper and whatever, boron, whatever else could possibly be recycled on planet Earth is recycled by agriculture, and we could put that on the front of a school yard and talk about that, because I think that's a damn good billboard, and that's kind of why we're doing this, and working with the right people in the industry. So if anybody wants to work with Tyler on their situation on a consultation, we'd be happy to facilitate. I'd like to thank all the panelists today. It meant a lot. It was a great conversation. It was an awesome conversation. Thanks so much, Terry. Great job, Tyler. It's the first time we had Tyler on a webinar, but I can tell you we're going to have you on a lot more, and I'm looking forward to our burgeoning relationship, because we need to be backed by agronomy at Aberhart Ag, because that's not our ShamWow. It's the ShamWow that's our ShamWow. And Jarrett, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate your support and your knowledge and your approach and your business acumen and all that good stuff. And obviously you've done a lot in the industry over the years to help producers with this complicated subject, right? Like, it continues on that it's a very complicated subject. And I hope most farmers haven't totally given up on these concepts of playing with this stuff, when you could just pour on more NPK, but I think there's more sophisticated, useful endeavors out there if you can get to that level. So obviously it takes a little bit of understanding, it takes a little bit of knowledge, but that's what networks are for. And Rob Sake's on the call, AgVisor Pro. You can get a hold of these people on AgVisor Pro. So let us know if you want to work with Tyler at all. We'd be happy to facilitate it. Thanks for coming on, Terry.
It was awesome. I'm going
Yeah.
to spend the rest of the weekend digesting what I learned today. There was a lot flying around there. It was awesome
to listen back to the recording. Thanks, Tyler, for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Right on. Thanks, Jared, for coming on.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Awesome. I hope everybody learned something and took something away, and let us know if you want to work any further with Suregrowth, or if you're interested in our products or Jarrett's products. And take care. That's it for now. See you again soon.
Thank you.
Hey, awesome. Thanks, guys.
Have a great weekend, everybody. All the best.